Hello, everyone. Welcome to King Poe Myers. And today we have a very special treat for you. Today we have author Haley Newlin with us. Haley, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Wonderful, thank you. So we started talking a couple weeks ago, and it really stemmed from our love of horror and more specifically Vincent Price. But before we get into all of that, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I am a two-time author. My first book was a dark fiction kind of horror young adult blend. It was really important to me to start with that age group just because when I was younger and got into horror, there wasn't enough really geared towards that age group.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not another Sarah Halls. And then my most recent publication that came out in December, Take Your Turn, Teddy. That's full-fledged adult horror, and I had a lot of fun with that. It takes place in the 1970s, so I got to channel a ton of serial killers and just 70s pop culture, which was really fun for me.
Thank you again for those copies of the book, by the way. Cannot wait to dive into that.
Yeah.
Um, And you said that's more adult horror.
Yeah, I'd say that's like it's pretty full-fledged. I really want to emphasize the psychological element of that just
Mm,
because the the poll I think recently that we've gotten past just wanting shock and terror, which of
yes.
course this book has, but more so I think people are finally locking into what horror can do for our minds, just to understand like the unhinging of it, the
Hmm.
trauma that we can carry, and how it affects us into our later lives. And so that's really what I wanted to explore and Take Your Turn, Teddy.
As an author, was it, or I should say, which do you prefer? Do you prefer writing for young adults, or do you like writing for adults and being able to really go all out?
Yeah, so I mean, I will always love Not Another Sarah Halls. I think it was this itch that I needed to start there for my first book, to start with young adults. But I definitely feel that once I wrote Take Your Turn, Teddy, I was two chapters in, and I remember sending a note to my editor, Clayton, and I said, okay, this is like I found my niche. Like this is my
Hmm.
spot, this is my center. So definitely I love the freedom I think that comes with adult horror. It's like, nothing's really off base there.
Hmm. When did you first start writing?
So I think I this sounds so cliche, but I've in a way always been writing.
Hmm.
I'm actually an identical twin.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so I've heard twin horror jokes my entire life. But my twin sister used to be like deathly afraid of thunderstorms.
Hmm.
To the point where she was having like these massive panic attacks. And so I
Oh,
used to write stories, and they were actually little comic books because we were really big into Marvel growing up. So I actually wrote little comics and I tucked them away in the basement so that whenever we had to go down there for a tornado or a thunderstorm, then we would read those stories.
tornado?
Yeah.
Are you in Tornado Alley?
I'm in Indiana, which we
Okay.
kind of get overlooked for how crazy our weather really is. I mean, last week it
Wow.
was 60, everybody was out walking their dogs, and yesterday we had a massive windstorm. The day before it was freezing rain. So,
Huh. I
yeah,
mean, someone from New England, myself. I mean, we're kind of that's kind of our famous joke in Boston. The weather will change by lunchtime. But I mean, sorry, I've never been to really that part of the country. Have you ever seen a tornado?
yes, multiple times, multiple times. So
Really?
yes, in Take Your Turn, Teddy, I actually put Teddy's childhood on this farm that was based on where I grew up for part of my childhood in Delphi, Indiana, which is this teeny tiny town past Purdue University.
Hmm.
And so we had these massive cornfields. Everybody had these massive pole barns, and we had a tornado rip through one of our pole barns. Thankfully, the house was okay, but it destroyed the pole barn.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've only seen them in movies. I cannot even
yeah.
imagine what it's like to actually see one
You honestly pulled a memory from my head. I wouldn't be like, I've seen a tornado. So I never really thought of it until you asked me. But yes, I've actually lived through a couple of tornadoes.
Were they close to your house?
Yeah, like the one instance with the pole barn. I'd say the pole barn was maybe 15 feet from the house. So it just thankfully missed the house.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm clearly someone who's never been to that part of the country. That is insane.
Yeah.
Happy it never really, caused that much damage for you.
Yeah, it's in it, but you really, as a writer, especially right now, I'm starting my third book, so you just kind of like, I feel like at the right now, my brain is just a sponge. So you're talking about tornadoes, and you're like, what is that like? And I'm like, let's maybe internalize that, share with readers what that's like, because. And that's why I
Absolutely.
love horror. There's so many different kinds of shock and fear. It's not
Hmm.
always Michael Myers with the knife. There's so many different kinds. And so you pulled that memory, and I might have to use that. I'll definitely give you a shout out if I do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I would love to read something like that. Please do that. That'd be so sick.
I will. I will.
Um, to our listeners, I stumbled across Haley's Instagram, and what jumped out at me was this amazingly gorgeous tattoo you have of what some might consider the greatest horror icon of all time, Vincent Price. And she's currently displaying that. It is on her arm, and that is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you. Thank you.
What made you want to get? I mean, I have several tattoos myself. I mean, what made
Yeah.
you want to get that tattoo?
So I have several myself as well. I'm actually on 13. So
Nice.
I've kind of started to see myself as a little bit, I feel like when you first get tattoos, there's so much pressure of what does this mean to you and what's the purpose? And of course, all my tattoos do have some meaning to me, but I sort of became a bit of an art collector as well.
Hmm.
And so in Diary of a Madman with Vincent Price, which is my all-time favorite, there's this scene where the Horla has possessed Vincent Price, and he's
Hmm.
sitting in his study, very Vincent Price like attire. He's got velvet on, like a velvet paisley blazer, and just the stern look on his face as he's being possessed. I feel like it captured like everything Vincent Price, like just the facial features. You look at this man and you're like, okay, he is an embodiment of horror.
Hmm.
So I saw that, and I literally got up, took a picture, and sent it to my tattoo artist. And I said, I've never thought of it before. I've watched this movie 100 times, but I said, we have to tattoo this scene with Vincent Price. So I have the tattoo done. I'm going back in 6 weeks after it heals a little bit more to get the green, like the
You're doing the
Twilight
green
Zone.
line? Oh, that's
Yes,
sick.
like the bright Horla possession green. So yes, I'm going back and adding that.
I I cannot wait for you to post about that.
I will. I
That's
will.
mint. You and me talked about it before we started shooting. Why do you think Vincent Price is considered by some the greatest horror icon? But also, to add on to that question, why do you think he's also overlooked?
Yeah. So one thing I think so let me start with why I think he's overlooked. And I never mean to bash another creator. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, each to their own. And um creators like John Carpenter are icons. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, he did a lot of great for the genre. But I also think there became this period where horror was about crossing a line. It was about showing blood, talking about blood, showing death, showing murder. And that kind of faded, I think, through the 60s and 70s a little bit. It wasn't quite as mainstream as it became in the 70s. So I think once it was there, it was all about the shock and terror.
Yep.
And so I think that's what people associate with horror. Is some people almost, I think, confuse just horror with slasher,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's kind of why people overlook Vincent Price, is because he's not associated with just those standard slasher films. You have to go back and you have to be willing to say, okay, some of this is gimmick horror and some of it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be goofy because it's old. Um, But what I think the draw is to Vincent Price, why I think when people find him, they just love him, it's because even though he has some bad movies. He has some that I've watched and I'm like, wow, I was not a fan of that one. Um, but he just brings such a presence all to his own. No matter what role he is in, he brings this presence, and you just know that there is dread and suspense and unease coming. And Vincent Price does that no matter good or bad what side he is on. In every film, he's able to accomplish that.
I love that word you just used, presence. He has one of the greatest presence an actor I've ever experienced, because like you said, a lot of his stuff 50s, 60s, 70s, and especially like in the 60s where, like, he really was pumping them out. The blood is like bright red, and it's like blood
Yes.
isn't that thick,
Yeah.
and it is sometimes can be a little cheesy, but his acting it just draws you in, and it's like, no, this is real. Like,
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
not silly at all. For a lot of actors, even some all-time greats, I feel like if you put them in that position, it's going to be silly.
Yeah.
It's going to be like,
Yeah.
oh, this is really tacky, but he makes it serious and intimidating.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny that you bring up kind of that wording of silly. I kind of carry this unpopular opinion I found
Mm.
when I've talked with other podcast hosts and just fellow horror creators. In my opinion, the early 2000s was a bad time for horror. I just don't love any early 2000s horror movies. And I think it's because for a lot of it, clearly not everybody, a lot of it was bad acting. It wasn't actors who knew how to grab that presence and how to own the dread and suspense of horror. And so I think they just became like goofy, campy horror movies.
I honestly couldn't agree with you more. I think the early 2000s produced some of the worst horror I've ever seen. Whenever people recommend, even if it has like a good review on Rotten Tomatoes or something, I've just been scarred by how
Yeah.
bad that error was. I don't like the Saw movies. I've said it before on this channel. I think they're torture porn. I think it's disgusting, and there's no real story, or it's just trying to gross out the audience.
Yeah.
I really like The Ring. I know was big, but I couldn't get into that.
No, see, you were the first person I've ever talked to who I the Saw movies, that term torture porn, I've never really known how to put it. But, of course horror is unsettling, but that's something entirely on its own. That's not unsettling, and like this Horla, this entity, is possessing Vincent Price, and he's trying to hang on to reality, to his values. That's horror. Is kind of that conflict between good and evil, that loss of control. Where, yes, Saw. Whenever somebody brings it up in a horror conversation, I just don't feel it belongs there.
When they first came out, I will admit I did like them. I mean, I was in middle school at the time,
Yeah,
so it was kind of like the fad, because every year, I think it was like every Halloween one would come out, and it had the
yeah,
ongoing story, and they always had a mystery, and it was fun as a kid.
yeah,
And I'm a very nostalgic person, and I love, like, things I watched as a kid, but that's like one of the few that I'm like, I can't believe I was into this. That was really
yeah.
me caught up in the fad. They're not good, in my opinion.
No, they're really not. I think I can't for the life of me pinpoint which one it would have been. There was one where I thought, okay, there might be a story here, and then the ending let me down. And so I tried all of them. And I remember
Wow.
maybe some of them had their moments. Yeah, yeah. My boyfriend is he's major into horror, and he loves the Saw movies.
Hmm.
I can't do it. I can't do it. I've had to get him into Vincent Price, and Vincent Price and Tim Burton are two huge like creators I've exposed him
Mm.
to. And it's so funny because I feel, when you talked about the goopy and thick and just very unrealistic bright red blood
Hmm.
that was in Vincent Price movies. I love that Tim Burton uses that. I love that Tim
Yes.
Burton unapologetically says, Vincent Price made this acceptable. It was awesome. So even in movies like Sweeney Todd, where it's tons of blood, he committed to that bright red, thick,
Hmm.
goopy blood. And I love it. I've had people say that's not realistic, and I don't care. I don't care.
It's paying homage to one of the greats. I mean, another one that Tim Burton did, the same was Sleepy Hollow, and
Yes,
I've
absolutely.
I've watched people break down that movie, and that's like a one movie just dedicated to the
Oh,
old
yeah.
style of horror, the bright red blood, and just that creepy atmosphere. Tim Burton,
Yeah.
he gets it.
Oh yeah, and how many greats are in Sleepy Hollow? I mean, you have that beginning scene with Christopher Lee. And
Mm.
I remember the first time I saw it, I paused it and went back just to hear Christopher Lee say Sleepy Hollow.
Oh my
No
god.
one can give that chilling line like Christopher Lee. And so Tim Burton, when I found him, it was actually through Tim Burton that I found Vincent Price. So
Hmm.
I love Tim Burton just because of, like you said, the homage he pays to everyone who's come before him in Gothic fiction, in horror film. And I love how present that is in everything he makes.
Absolutely. Oh, it's it's funny you bring up that line because last Halloween, me and my wife were going to Sleepy Hollow, and I made I'm not tech savvy, people. I'm not. I'm officially an old man. So I made like a quick little, like, I think it was a vine of just that scene of people of him saying Sleepy Hollow, like you're going to a town, and I think we got like 10,000 hits, and I'm like, what the hell?
It's like we use that word again, embodiment. It is like the embodiment of chilling, just good gothic horror. So that line, I never get sick of Sleepy Hollow. I probably watch it once a week.
Oh, respect, total
Yes.
respect. Um, I would love for our audience to know if they're listening and they want to pick up a Vincent Price. Can you give them a few that
Yeah.
are Haley approved? Like these are must watches.
Yeah, so we've already talked about Diary of a Madman. You can't go wrong there. It's a little bit more on the um supernatural kind of horror, but I
Hmm.
love it. It has some crime aspects too, and that's really cool. I think that's just a really great age of Vincent Price as well. So I definitely recommend Diary of a Madman. Um, Listing my all-time favorites, my second would have to be House of Wax.
Mm,
And I remember when I first saw House of Wax, I don't want to ruin it for readers, but you see Vincent Price in different forms throughout that
yes.
movie. And I remember that kind of bumming me out initially because when you sign on for a Vincent Price movie, you want the Vincent Price presence consistently. So that kind of threw me for a little bit, but no, he owns it the way he does every other film. He's brilliant in House of Wax. That has a lot of great, I think, homage to classic horror tropes. It's got that unease, it's got that dread.
Hmm.
Definitely shows that time where we're crossing the line and starting to publicly talk about death and murder and things like that, and just watching the public's fascination with it.
Hmm.
So definitely House of Wax. Third one. Okay, this one might be a little bit of a loop, but I'd have to
Hmm.
say The Haunted Palace. And
Yes.
The Haunted Palace is mostly, if I'm not mistaken, it's mostly a nod to Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft. I know it does have some Poe influences here and there, but I think it's predominantly Lovecraft. I'm typically not a fan of Lovecraftian horror. It's just not really, that's not my alley.
Okay.
Um, but I love Vincent Price as a vindictive warlock. That's such a strong Vincent Price role. So I definitely think if you want to get the essence of why people just get so captivated by him, those three films, Diary of a Madman, House of Wax, and The Haunted Palace.
I have actually watched all three of those. All three are home runs.
Yes.
They're so much fun. Out of the three you mentioned, House of Wax I loved. It just made me really upset at the end. I won't give out what happened, but the ending was just so sad. I was so bummed out.
Yes.
I want to give him a hug. I'm like, this is not right.
Yes, it is sad. It is very sad. And I think Diary of a Madman is kind of the same way, but Diary of a Madman was almost satisfying in the ending, even though it kind of had that same kind of sadness, but it was satisfying in my opinion.
Do you know if Vincent Price has ever finished a movie and a house or a castle doesn't burn down? Because I
I
watched a random Vincent Price last week and I was like, you burn down every damn house you go into, dude.
Yeah, I know, no respect for architecture. No, I don't think so. The only one I'm thinking maybe Tower of London. You know, he's in a castle. I don't think he sets fire to Tower of London in
It
that one.
doesn't set fire to it.
I'm like I've seen that one once, but I'm trying to recall.
Oh, he is something else.
He is. And even see Tower of London, that was not one that I wouldn't rank that up there as one of the great Vincent Price movies, but it
Mhm.
had some great Vincent Price moments. I mean, this isn't a giveaway. Anybody who's familiar with the history of that part of the royal family, you know, he's a villain in that one. And what I think stood out to me most in Tower of London, there's a scene where it almost kind of reminded me of The Shining, where it has those
Hmm.
two boy ghosts telling, trying to lure him to come play with them. And so that kind of stood out to me a little bit. I wondered if maybe Stephen King had ever pulled some influence from Vincent Price movies.
Ooh, that'd be a question to ask him.
It would. And that's the thing, we talked about Vincent Price being overlooked. Think about, the age of Stephen King, how old he is. He probably,
Mhm.
I would imagine, has seen or was around when Vincent Price was a big deal.
I wonder if they ever met at something.
I know we should do some digging.
Oh, absolutely. Um, well, you just gave me the perfect segue. You bring up the king himself. Um,
Yes.
what are your thoughts on Stephen King?
I love Stephen King. I really do. I know there has been a little bit of a tiff with him recently and his readers because he's still cranking out, nearly a book a year the way he always has.
Yep.
And readers are not feeling that King satisfaction. With his latest novel, Later. I saw some mixed reviews on that one. With The Institute, I saw some mixed reviews. The Institute, I liked it. Now, did I see kind of what readers were complaining about a little bit? Yes. I do think that there is a solid difference in the different, in the eras of Stephen King. You
Yeah.
have, 70s Stephen King, and then I just think it's a lot of pressure to put on the poor man. He's is still creating very enjoyable, great novels. Are they as great as It and Carrie? Probably not. I don't.
Hmm.
How many of those can you ask for? It is my opinion. I mean, and
Yeah.
I will always read anything he puts out. I think even the people who are giving him a little bit of flack for it, they're still going to read Stephen King because it's Stephen King, and he always brings something, even to the less than great novels.
I've stated on this channel before, I love and adore the Institute. I feel like I feel like yes, Classic King is obviously the best. Like I'd
Yeah,
read Classic King before anything else. But I feel like a lot of his new stuff gets a little too much flack. I thought
that's what I. Yeah,
I thought the Institute was amazing. I loved The Outsider. that really made me uneasy. I read the first 2 books of the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, loved them. I'm doing the 3rd one soon. And Dr. Sleep, I think that
Yes.
is one of the gutsiest things a writer's ever done. You take what is considered the greatest ghost story of all time, and then you say, I'm going to give it a sequel.
Yes.
Who does
Dr.
that?
Sleep. Yeah, exactly. And who can do that other than Stephen King? No one. And I would have to agree with you 100%. I loved The Institute. Stephen King has a knack for writing um, childhood characters, characters going through that angst of childhood and then putting them in these crazy circumstances. I actually used The Institute as kind of like a book model that I referred to a lot when writing Take Your Turn, Teddy,
Okay.
because people kept saying that the main character felt too intelligent for his age.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something I have heard with Take Your Turn, Teddy, that Teddy feels too mature for his age. But that I'm always open to criticisms. I think it makes me a better writer. But that is something I say nope, nope. And the reason why is because in the institute in Take Your Turn, Teddy, these kids are put in crazy circumstances that require them to grow up faster, make decisions that a child that age never should have to.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's a little different, where Teddy is mostly experiencing trauma in the terms of domestic abuse. He leaves his home and goes 15 hours away from Indiana, um, or from New Hampshire to Indiana. And so I just think that there's something to be said about an author that knows that takes the time to say this isn't a normal kid.
I absolutely love the fact that you took a page right out of Stephen King's book, and where you live is where the character is going.
Exactly. And yes, I've done that. And so both of my books take place, they start in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
And people always ask why I do that. And I I never thought I was going to get to go to college. We didn't have any money. I didn't come from money at all. And so I had to work 40 hours a week to pay for school. And I
Mm-hmm.
was sick of working and trying to save for college and not going to college. So I decided to swallow my pride. I thought I needed to go to, Michigan State or Ohio State. And I applied for Southern New Hampshire University and I attended school online. And it was the greatest decision I ever made. Working remotely as a student, I think, gave me the discipline I needed as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Their writing program is just incredibly up to date. I mean, this was the first time when I went to Southern New Hampshire that anyone had ever shown me Shirley Jackson. I'd never heard of Shirley Jackson before I got to
Wow.
college. That's insane. That's insane. And so I read Shirley Jackson, I read Gillian Flynn, I read Stephen King, and I just really fell in love with the program. So because of that,
Nice.
I give a little nod to New Hampshire in both of my novels. But yes, in Take Your Turn, Teddy, I pull it back to Indiana. Um, Indiana is just, I mean, I'm sure anybody could say this about their home state, but Indiana is just bizarre. It's bizarre because there's all these different corners, there's
Mm-hmm.
so much going on, I feel like. And it's so easy in Indiana to go from, this populated area to cornfield and woodlands.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought there was something really powerful, because a big theme in horror is isolation.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought there was something really powerful in taking this boy who's used to being in a very like downtown feel kind of hometown and then going to this isolation of kind of farmy Indiana.
Mm-hmm. 2 things. One, I think it's a very cheap criticism when people say, "Oh, you're just writing where you're from. Well, write what you know."
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
Stephen King always gets crap like, "Oh, everything's in Maine." Yeah, he's from Maine,
Yeah.
so he's gonna write about Maine.
And it's a
And
fun Easter egg for readers, I think.
yeah, and secondly, I was in Indiana twice in my life, and I
Okay.
was family road trip to Chicago to see family, and Indiana stressed me out because it's a
Yes.
road. It is
Yes.
one road. There's no hills, and it's just cornfield. And I was just
Yes.
like, when is this road going to end? I want to see
Yes.
buildings. Where are
Yes.
buildings?
Yes, yes, exactly. And I started with this book in New Hampshire, and I didn't intentionally, or I didn't originally intend to go to Indiana, to take it back to Indiana. And because I decided to put this book in the 1970s, my poor boyfriend, I made him go back and watch like every 1970s horror film. And that's just, like I said, when I write, my brain just becomes a sponge, and I'm just trying to absorb what's working, what is scaring me, or what is achieving these themes. And so we watched Children of the Corn, and I had never seen Children of the Corn before I wrote Take Your Turn, Teddy. I of course had read it, loved it, and I watched the movie, and I just kept thinking, like, is corn scary to people? Like, is corn scary? Like, I kept thinking that. And then I realized, yeah, it is. You can't see through corn. And, being from Indiana, I put this in a scene in my book. In the summer, we'd wear long sleeves and jeans, even though it was summer, and play in the corn. So, and then wear long sleeves so the corn leaves didn't like slice you.
It can slice
And
you?
Oh yeah, yeah. And see, I put that in my book too. And my editor, Clayton, he commented and he's like, "What the hell?" And he's like, "Why is Teddy wearing long sleeves?" And I'm like, "Oh, you've never had a corn burn or a corn cut." And he's like, "What is a corn cut?" The
Corn burn?
leaves, yeah, they get so dry and brittle that if you rub your skin on them, it burns you. And if you're running like through them and the leaves get you, you can get a little nick. So not only is cornfield scary because you can't see within them, but it's like, ow. So I decided, I talked about it more and more with people. I work as a remote teaching assistant. And so I started talking about it with students, and they just kept saying, like, yes, cornfields are scary. And I thought, what better way to make my already isolated character feel just kind of this internal terror, of his new home than putting him in Indiana surrounded by a cornfield?
Makes sense. Have you ever been lost in a cornfield?
Yes, yes, I have. And it's a big deal in Indiana every Halloween. We go through corn mazes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually 10 minutes away from like a world famous corn maze.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they always do these aerial pictures of them
Yep.
because, yeah, and so they did like Stranger Things one year. They've done the Beatles, which was really cool. My hometown is where Purdue is, so they've done, like Boilermakers and stuff like that. So yes, I can say I get lost in that one every year. But it just running through cornfields, yes, that happened to me as a kid too. Thankfully, there's always like a street lamp
Okay.
near the end of the field, so that was kind of like which I didn't give that to my reader or my character Teddy. I didn't give him that way out. But I had a street lamp, us cruel authors. Yeah, I even thought about that. I'm like, do I want to give him this security? And I didn't. So there is kind of a scary cornfield scene.
Nice. And yes, I am a huge fan of Children of the Corn. I thought the book was outstanding. I thought the movie was good until that cheap ending of theirs.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
what they were thinking.
No, and I think the first time I saw it, I was watching old like Vincent Price horror. So I was like, okay, was this just maybe like a budget thing, like, and so I was willing to let it go. But every time I talk about Children of the Corn, it comes up, and
Mm-hmm.
I went back and I reread just that ending of the book,
Oh,
and
so good.
so good. It's so yeah, you have to kind of harp on that ending. Stephen King, the story deserved a better ending, brought
Yeah.
to life. So this might be a little bold, but if anybody ever did a remake of Children of the Corn,
Mm-hmm.
I think Mike Flanagan could handle it. He's done The Haunting of
Mm-hmm.
Hill House, he's done Blind Manor, Doctor Sleep. I would like to see if he was going to tackle another King project, and he would be under some pressure, but he was with
Yeah.
Dr. Sleep. You know, he had that impossible task of combining Kubrick's The Shining with Stephen King's.
I still haven't seen it. I've been afraid to.
Yeah, yeah. You've never seen The Shining, or you've never seen Dr. Sleep?
I've never seen it. I read it, but I haven't seen it.
Okay, okay. Um, you know, Stephen King, when he talks about the film adaptation of The Shining, he says that he says that his issue with it is, I'm sure you're familiar that he hates it. Yes,
Hates.
Hates it. And I had read The Shining and then I had watched The Shining, and it was almost like I was like, it was two separate things. They were totally, not totally different, but it was like Kubrick grabbed at elements of The Shining. He didn't really get the essence of it. And I think that comes down to that conversation we had earlier, where horror used to be about crossing the line, of talking about death, of talking about the supernatural, about madness, cabin fever, something like that. And so for a while we kind of had this sort of, if I can say this without being too bold, sell out horror, where it was just about blood and scare.
Yep.
And I think that's where horror gets a bad rep. They think it's just about jump scares. And if what Stephen King says about The Shining, if you listen to him talk about it, he says the movie was so cold and the book had so much heart. And I think that's a perfect way of putting it. I mean, there's so much in the movie that we don't get about Wendy Torrance's character.
Mm-hmm.
And something, as a woman in horror, something I've always loved is, I don't think Stephen King has ever created that, quote, like useless, just screaming girl character.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that Stephen King has ever really created a character like that. And in my opinion, that's what Stanley Kubrick made Wendy Torrance. You almost hate her. You almost hate her in The Shining. And in fact, a lot of people say they do. And poor Shelley Duvall, that's not fair to her. So that's kind of my biggest issue, is I don't think the characters are dynamic. I also don't think the rules of The Shining are set up. I had so many friends who watched The Shining and then watched Dr. Sleep and said, I didn't know what The Shining was until I saw Dr. Sleep. Like, they didn't really get the connection between Danny and the caretaker or the chef. I'm trying to remember his name, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. For me, what was very disheartening was Jack, because in the book he's not a nice guy, but he's very tragic. He has a lot of demons, and in Stanley's, it's Jack Nicholson, great actor, playing Jack Nicholson, and he's a dick the entire time. It's like, I don't feel sympathetic for you. In the book, it's like, you are such a bastard, but you're really trying, but you're a bastard. And this really great dynamic. The movie, you're like, I want you to die.
Yeah, no, and that's 100% right. It's, you have to create that conflict. It's that conflict of, at what point can I no longer cheer for this character that wants to be good? At what point does this character fail beyond forgiveness? And he did a brilliant job establishing that in the book. You're like, okay, shit, he messed up again. Okay, he messed up again. Like, okay, yeah, he's kind of being an asshole. And then, but you still are rooting for Jack Torrance. And then, like you said, you get to The Shining, and from the beginning, I'm just like, you're an asshole. Like, Wendy, go. Like, leave him, go. And so you never establish that desire or that want for Jack to be better. I'm like, shit, leave him there and go.
Exactly. All right. Feet to the fire. You have full right to change your opinion the minute you're done. Can you give us roughly your top 5 Stephen Kings?
Okay. This is so hard. This is always hard. Okay. number one is easy for me. In fact, Not Another Sarah Halls, my first novel, my note from the author, I always write these little intros, was
Mhm.
essentially an ode to Pennywise.
Okay.
Because Pennywise or It was really my first horror novel. I snuck it. My mother did not want me to read it, did not think I was old enough. I was probably 13 years old. And it did
Okay.
scare me. It scared the hell out of me. And I'm from Indiana, corn and things. And so, so, but I loved it. I loved that experience. I loved Beverly's character. So it is definitely my number one. Um, oh man. Okay. Then I would have to say Dr. Sleep. I honestly
Wow.
believe I would put Dr. Sleep that highly, and mostly just because I love the audacity and the bravery
Yes.
of King to pick up the greatest, as you said, the greatest ghost story of all time and say, I can continue this. I can do something with this. And it was believable. I believe him when he said it, and I believe he did it. He did it. And
Absolutely.
and what I loved about it, it was taking what worked in The Shining so well and making it modern, with
Hmm.
with Abra's character, and just it felt fitting to this age too. It didn't feel like we were just reading something from the 70s. It felt very applicable to today. It felt relevant. Okay, so Dr. Sleep.
Very
I'm
quick
a
side.
big
Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
one very quick side note. You and me are in a very rare camp because I believe the same thing. I do put Doctor Sleep above The Shining. I like The Shining. I've said this before on this podcast. When something's been hyped up for you for over 20 years and you finally read it, you're like, it
Yeah.
was good. It's
Yeah.
good. It's not bad. I don't hate it. I really enjoyed it. But for me, it suffers from the overhype. And with Doctor Sleep, I was like, my bar was so low. I'm like, this is gonna be garbage. Like
Yeah.
this is you trying to make money, and I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely agree. So, and also I had this really bizarre experience where I saw The Shining first and then read The Shining. So
Same.
for me, it was like, yeah, shit, like Kubrick messed up. Kubrick
Yeah.
messed up, so it was just kind of, for me, it was like, how bad did Kubrick mess up? That was kind of, I hate to say that, but that was my pull to The Shining, was how bad did Kubrick mess up? And I read it, fell in love with Wendy and Jack, and was able to see that. But really being able to pick up what worked in that novel and just capitalize it the way he did in Doctor Sleep, I think that is the essence of Stephen King's artistry.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So for sure, for sure. I'm honestly surprised I didn't talk about it with you a little bit more. It was the groundbreaking. Okay, I want to write horror for me.
Oh
Um,
wow. Okay.
yes, yes, and so I was honestly, for the longest time, was told, people don't like horror, and even when I said, okay, I'm going to be an author, people were like, great, and then I said, yeah, I'm writing horror. It was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that was a thing. And so I had this fear of stepping all the way into horror. So now I'm very protective when people are like, Haley writes thrillers. I'm like, no, Haley writes horror.
Mm-hmm.
Because every horror is a thriller, but not every thriller is horror. There is some precision of what is included. And so even though Not Another Sarah Halls is young adult, I definitely wanted to give that younger audience the essence of horror.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen King's It really helped me do that. And again, just loving that story, I just thought, if I'm gonna do this, I'm going all in. I'm gonna write horror. So I always say my heart goes to Pennywise. So, and there's just no one like Pennywise. So yeah.
I love it. I love Pennywise, and I really thought for a long time he was going to be my undisputed favorite King villain. Over winter break, I read for the first time The Stand, and I was
Okay.
like, "Oh, Randy Flagg!
Yes.
I
Yes.
love me some Randy Flagg."
Yes. I do too. brilliant character, of course, from King. There's something about, I have this shadow figure in Take Your Turn, Teddy, and I studied it. I read the movie, or I read the book again. I watched both movies. And it was just that dynamic of, going from a young adult book to preying on a young child. Like, so not only showing that loss of innocence, in Not Another Sarah Halls, but then someone taking that innocence or really taking advantage of the innocence. So the shadow very much kind of lures my main character Teddy in with this sort of Pennywise dynamic, and that's what I think fascinated me about it. And every single time when poor Georgie stays, I'm like, get the boat and go. Every single time it gets me, every single time. And so Pennywise will always be my number one villain. But I have to tell you, Rose the Hat really, really climbed that for me. I loved Rose the Hat's character. And I don't know if you've seen Dr. Sleep. The actress in Dr. Sleep who plays Rose the Hat is incredible. She is amazing, really brings the character to life. I mean, from the start, you're like, oh, this chick is bad news.
Nice. So you said it, you said
Dr. Sleep.
Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep.
Okay.
Number three,
I feel like this might put me in a rare camp. This is one that everybody knows, but not one everybody loves. And for me, that was Carrie. I loved Carrie. The movie, I hate the movie. I hate the movie so much. And every Carrie movie, and I'm so sorry to listeners if you're sitting there saying, what? How? I just hated it. I feel like it was so much of that lacking in presence from actors that is needed in horror. And of course, blood is a huge symbol in Carrie. So of course there was going to be blood. But again, I felt that it was like, okay, we have the blood, we've done our job. It wasn't, I don't think we did enough to know Carrie. We didn't do enough to know her the way we did in the book. But the reason I say Carrie is one of my favorite Stephen King books. I love that exploration of religion and when religion becomes too far, taking that ideology of being good and actually taking it so radically that it becomes evil. And I think that is horrifying. I think that's terrifying. And so I'm gonna quote like Civil War Captain America, so someone who thinks they're right, you're wrong and you think you're right, and that makes you dangerous. And I think that when you have someone who so wholeheartedly believes they're right and they're doing everything right, that is so dangerous when they're that wrong. And that's Carrie's mother. And so Carrie is another just, I think, tragic story. And I don't think the movie captured that well enough for me, in my opinion. I don't think they showed that enough of that trauma. There was shock, but I mean, just really, maybe it's the internal dialogue that we get in the book that I think really helps Carrie and empathize with her.
I've not seen the movie. I've read the book for the first time last year. It made me very sad. When I finished, I was just sad. Wonderful book. I will definitely read it again. But I just want to give that girl a hug, because no one had it worse than Carrie.
Oh, for sure. I definitely agree. Okay, so we said, I said it. I said Dr. Sleep. I said Carrie. Oh man, why is this so hard? Okay, this is going to be, I think this is another kind of surprise. We talked about the different eras of Stephen King. I was in love with Finders Keepers by Stephen King. Stepping outside of horror, but there was that King presence and those King characters. And, we get Mr. Mercedes, we get Brady in the first book, and then you go to the second book, and it's somebody entirely different for most of the book. It's this young kid, and just like I said before, Stephen King is a master of writing child characters, like
Mm-hmm.
complex child characters. And it's a classic case again of wanting to do right, or
Mm-hmm.
but wanting to do right, but sometimes there being a lot of wrong in it too. um I loved Finders Keepers, and so much when I hear people talk about the Hodges trilogy, they always focus on End of Watch. And I know I don't think you I think you said you're getting to End of Watch,
Yes, I've not read it
um
yet.
which is fantastic. It's fantastic. And I think the way it brings together everything for the Hodges trilogy is just really satisfying for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Book 2, Finders Keepers, that blew me away. That, to me, that book was like, no, Stephen King is not done. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this, everything we want to check the boxes in Stephen King books is still alive and well.
Completely agree. Finders Keepers blew me away. I didn't think anything could top Mr. Mercedes, and he did Finders Keepers. I'm like, that's better than Mr. Mercedes. And I thought Mr.
Yeah.
Mercedes was 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, for sure. Something I always have to point out with Mr. Mercedes, how amazing is Stephen King's just track record for the fact that he could make Brady wear a clown mask, and we, to make a nod to Pennywise. So to
Mm-hmm.
be so famous that you can say, in this clown mask, and just barely describe it, and we're like, Pennywise, like,
Yep.
how famous are you? You know what I mean? Like, and some people were like, wow, that was kind of like cheap. And I was like, no, like, this man, like, no, he is scary. He is horror. And so I just thought it was really cool to see him combine kind of like crime scare with Pennywise. I thought that was really cool.
Completely agree.
Okay, last pick. Last pick. Okay. This one, see, this is so funny because I talked about, loving classic King, but The Outsider, it just blew my mind. The Outsider, I thought, was amazing. Um, Holly freaking Gibney in that book was awesome. Awesome. Holly was one of the best things about the Hodges trilogy. And I don't understand it. I see book reviews sometimes and people don't like Holly's character. I love Holly.
I've had many people come on and talk about King, and there is a line in the sand for Holly. Either you
Yeah.
love her or you think it is the worst thing King has ever created. I like her. I
Yes.
don't get this hatred towards this character. King has said, multiple times already that he's in love with Holly. Like, he wants to do
Yes.
more with her. I think she's a really fun character.
Oh, I think she's fantastic. And I think, Stephen King talks a little bit of, he says that he looked at kind of like being a product of your environment. And that's so much of his characters. And it's so funny because Holly makes me think of Carrie a little bit, of just being so
Mm,
sheltered and so skittish and so afraid. But what he gave Holly that he never gave Carrie was a chance. Someone that did see her, someone that did make her feel grounded and comfortable, and that was Hodges. And from that, she just became a badass. And what I love about that is he also showed that we treat emotion like it's this downfall, like it's this thing
mm-hmm.
that holds us back, where Holly's emotion really drives some of her intelligence and some of her intuition that has saved the day more than once.
Completely agree. And once again, I have not read book 3. I think watching her progress was amazing because, unfortunately, when I first started reading King, I just started kind of picking up books randomly. And one of the
Yeah.
books I picked was The Outsider. Come to find out, it's after the whole Hodges trilogy. It's like,
Yeah.
damn it. So when I actually see Holly from the beginning, I'm like, oh, wow, you're not ready to talk to people. You're not ready to do
Yeah.
anything. Like, she has that abusive mom, and
Yes.
I love her arc.
Yeah, I do too. And it shows like trauma in so many different forms. It
Mm,
shows the different abuse, especially from mothers. I think we hear abuse, and I think we see like a mean like father figure, but the kind of microaggressions that can exist in an abusive mother, I think, is such a strong character that King works with a lot.
Absolutely. Have you by chance watched either of the shows?
Yes, yes. So I loved The Outsider. My only complaint with The Outsider was I felt that they kind of locked into one side of Holly.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get to see kind of that warmth of Holly, but at the same time, I'm wondering if it's because you don't have Hodges. You know, you don't have
Yeah.
Hodges with her in The Outsider. So it is that very bizarre kind of girl who's skittish, but has these strong opinions and has a process to how she wants everything done. So I wonder if that was just more of a sentimental thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted more of Holly, but maybe that part of Holly didn't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the Mr. Mercedes show, I thought they nailed Holly's character 100%. They did give Hodges, it's either Scottish or Irish. They gave him a very thick Scottish or Irish accent. And
Okay.
I know it shouldn't be a big deal, but at first I'm like, who is this? Like the body, this is Hodges, but the voice, it kind of threw me for the first 3 episodes. I'm like, okay. And like even just the way he cursed, I'm pretty sure it's Irish. Just the way he cursed, it was like very different, like Hodges. So it kind of that threw me for a little bit, but in all, it came together really well. The casting of Brady, I thought, was done very well.
And does the TV show, do they, is it books one, two, three, or do they play around with it?
Okay, so I they just started season 3, and so I can't speak for it yet. I'll just say so far it has annoyed the hell out of me that
Okay.
that they went from book 1 to book 3. So they skipped Finders Keepers. And so I guess season 3 is Finders Keepers, and this might be a little, like hardcore Stephen King fan, but I just don't know that I trust a director to handle that change in structure with enough care, that it deserves. I thought
Yeah.
Finders Keepers made so much sense where it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not I'm not sure how that's going to go.
I I've not I've only seen The Outsider. I've watched half the show. Absolutely love it so far. And as for the Hodges, I don't know now. The fact that
Yeah.
maybe I'll watch just season 3, but
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
disappointing.
The first season was good, but I'll tell you the ending I was a little disappointed. It was like as we got further along, I was kind of like, eh. At first people were
Mm-hmm.
like, is that good? And I was like, yeah. And then the further I got into it, I can't quite put my finger on it. We'll have to talk about it when you watch it. But I started to go from, yeah, I was like, I'm hanging in there. I'm watching it. I'm moving through it. But
Mm-hmm.
the outsider, I found pretty satisfying. I do think you lose some essence of Holly just because they wanted it to be more about why can't I think of his name? Ralph, the
Yeah.
the lead character. I think they did take some Holly away just because I think they were going into it with the idea that some watchers or viewers wouldn't be familiar with Holly.
Yeah.
So as a very pro Holly freaking Gibney, I was like, damn it, that's Holly's role. Like that's Holly does that.
Yeah, The Outsider, I thought captured the essence of the book so well. Once again, I'm only halfway through the show, but reading The Outsider, it was so dark and
Yes.
very uncomfortable. And watching the show, they brought that right in. Like it's not like this is so horrible what has happened,
Yeah.
and everything that's going into it, it's like it's very heavy.
Yeah, and I think the heaviest theme in The Outsider is helplessness. And I hope you see it when you read Take Your Turn Teddy. I tried to infuse so much of that from The Outsider into Take Your Turn Teddy, just that helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the man who's accused in the beginning of The Outsider, or the victims. It's so many different forms. I don't want to give too much of it away, but you know what I'm saying. There's
Yeah.
just this ongoing theme of helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what makes it so dark.
Absolutely. We have a question for you by one of our
Okay.
listeners.
All
This is
right.
this is from Jamie Stewart. All right,
Okay.
it's a bit. Okay, it's more of a discussion topic than a question. It's about the editorial support traditional publishers give. Big names like King get published anyway because the guy sells no matter what. But I've heard from new authors that have signed with companies who receive no support, not even a critical look at their work. They have just been told their book will come out eventually and then no contact. So the discussion idea, which is actually better self-published or traditional self-published authors are aware of the stigma surrounded them, that they pay people to proofread, to beta read, etc. for them. Self-published authors invest a lot to make themselves seen by readers who feel self-published stuff is lesser than not. I also think there's a discussion to be had on the fact that traditional publishers, because they don't take the risks or not publishing the best genre fiction anymore, small presses are. So, your take.
Okay. So I kind of did for both of my books, I went through a hybrid publisher, because I do think there's so much wrong with the publishing industry, and definitely a huge side of that is not taking risks. I also
Mm-hmm.
think, you have, and it starts too with agents. I think sometimes you have agents who make these very bold claims, we don't want another vampire novel. Well, maybe you haven't seen good vampire novels yet, like it's just so to shut out, and vampire stuff isn't really my thing. But you know what I'm saying? Like, so
Yeah.
if to shut it out entirely, I think is completely unfair, especially when you have some strong stories, and especially I think with horror, you do it right, you can pull people in, like
Yes.
so many. Stephen King got me to read Salem's Lot, and I've never been a vampire buff, so done well, you can pull people in. So that I think there is this progression in understanding the tenacity of self-published authors.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my advice would be to keep going, keep writing, and do your homework, do your research as well. I find that authors put themselves out there, and when they get a response, it's exciting, it's exhilarating, and then they put everything they have into a publisher who's not well established, or who ghosts them, or somebody who promises to give them amazing book covers and support and things like that. So I think it definitely comes down to research.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they connected to? Who are their published authors? I think that's always a telltale, like, who are the published authors they have? Look at them, reach out to them. That's a huge thing. But I hate that stigma
Mm-hmm.
against self-published authors. I mean, totally going off the rack, Rupi Kaur is a self-published poetry writer, and now she's a New York Times bestseller.
Wow.
And she had so many people tell her, people don't want to read this, people aren't going to want to read this, people don't care about trauma, mental health. um
Hmm.
Now they do. We really do, we really do. And so I think that with the right story, with the right pushes, you can self-publish, and you just have to get out there, reach out to awesome podcast hosts who will let you talk about Vincent Price for 20 minutes, and keep the conversation going for not only just your book, but what inspires you as a creator. And I think the rest will kind of fall into place from there.
Nice. Yes, I completely agree that there's this weird stigma of like, oh, you don't have a big publisher backing you, so
Yeah.
therefore the writing isn't going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that's
And the
what?
reason I brought up Rupi Kaur, because it's like, clearly big publishers don't know everything. And that's not to bash them or anything, but there's they overlook things. There's things that are missed. And so
Absolutely.
I think you should always be open to criticism, suggestions, and make changes and things like that. But I don't think, walking away because a big publisher didn't notice you is ever my advice. Self-publish the damn thing, keep going, and get out there, and readers will love you for it. I think it is that extra push, which
Hmm.
is hard, but if you do it enough and you do your homework, like I said, it becomes enjoyable. Like here I am talking about Take Your Turn, Teddy, and my books with you, but I also got to, very naturally talk about Stephen King and Vincent Price and Tim Burton and just everybody who's made me a creator.
Hmm. Questions actually about your work that I have. Is it difficult for an author, or do you make the choice about audiobooks? Like, is that something that you want to
So
pursue with your work?
yeah. So I definitely do want to pursue it with my work. Like I said, I'm currently partnered with a hybrid publisher. So we do pre-sales and pre-orders, and that helps fund the publishing cost. So there is like a very high price tag on audiobooks. So I've
Hmm.
never done one. I did think about self-publishing an audiobook, because the other thing that's always been weird for me is my publisher wants me to read my own audiobook, and I've seen a couple of authors do that. Even when I hear this podcast, I'm sure everybody says this, but I cringe because my voice is just high pitched, and it's not what I want in a horror story. It's not what I want. Even for my young adult story that follows a female, lead character, it's not what I want at all. So I do like audiobooks. I do think, I listen to podcasts all the time, and I just think, like I told you, when I'm writing, my brain just becomes this sponge, and I think audiobooks allow me to absorb even more content than I can. So it's
Hmm.
nice to have audiobooks and have, when I don't have reading time. So I do appreciate kind of the freedom of audiobooks.
I am the biggest supporter of audiobooks. I think it's such a convenient way to read. Like the way I read personally is I have the book and I listen to it at the same time
Okay.
because it, I get distracted very easily. So listening kind of zeroes me in.
That's interesting. I've never tried that. I think my issue I had with audiobooks, it might have been Carrie, that I was trying to listen to the audiobook and I hated the narrator. I hated it. And I think it was because she would do this thing where whenever Carrie had this internal dialogue,
Hmm.
she would shift her voice that just made it sound very whiny. And so it
Hmm.
kind of like made me mad at the narrator. I'm like, you don't understand Carrie's character. Like, she's not whiny. She's in a very abusive, traumatic environment.
I mean, I think that may be just my opinion. Something very difficult for you or any author is to get the right voice because I listen to
Exactly.
so many audiobooks and there are some bad ones. Like there are some like
Yeah.
robots out there. But
Oh,
when
yeah.
you can hit a good reader, I mean, funny enough, James Franco did The Dead Zone. And
Wow. Wow. I did not know that.
it was weird because the first chapter, I'm like, it's James Franco smoking a joint, reading The Dead Zone to
Yes.
me. But it was actually good. He's actually really
I
good.
You say it and I can hear it. I also think I have this very, very unfair expectation where I want Vincent Price to narrate my audiobooks. I want that raspy, just very smooth, that's the thing about it's that raspy and smooth ballads that
Mhm.
Vincent Price masters. And I want that. I sometimes, just for like comfort, I struggle with anxiety. I
Mhm.
will listen to Vincent Price reading The Raven,
Oh my God,
just
yes.
because it's so comforting, and it's amazing. And so I probably have this very subconscious real, like, where I'm like, it doesn't sound like Vincent Price, which no one's gonna sound like Vincent Price. I do have an Australian friend. Her name's Claire Smith. She's the author of Helena. She also did the illustrations that will be in the hardcover edition of Take Your Turn Teddy, coming out April
Ooh.
16th.
Oh, very nice.
Yes. And so she is doing some narration on the book trailer that we're launching for the hardcover. My book blurb, or my summary, there's this first line that says, "No one knows your darkness like your own shadow." And she just reads
Ooh.
this in a very smooth Australian accent. And she's like, "Is that good? Is that okay?" I'm like, yes. She has a YouTube channel where she tells creepy pastas stories as she draws and as she does her illustrations. I just get so lost in her voice. It's just, it sounds like kind of not to be too contradicting, but it sounds kind of Victorian Gothic. It's
Mm-hmm.
perfect. It's really great for talking about those kind of horror and creepy things. So I'm glad I found her.
I'm happy you found her too. When you find the right voice and it matches with what you're reading, it's just the best thing in the world.
I'm gonna have to dive deeper into this practice of listening and reading at the same time.
I thoroughly enjoy it. And also I am the slowest reader on earth. So it really helps me just go, because I can spend an hour reading like 10 pages. With the audiobook,
Okay.
it's like I can do like 30 or 40 pages.
Okay. I'm gonna have to make that suggestion to my boyfriend. I love him. We've been together for 6 years, and he's great. And I hate that I've only brought him up twice, and I'm like, he likes Saul and I don't, and he's a slow reader and I'm fast. But we'll be watching a movie, and like, oh my God, the Star Wars movies, and they have that intro with the text,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes, and he'll look at me like, it's gone. I'm like, you're not done? No, can you rewind it? And I'm like, and then it'll go again. And he'll look at me and he'll go, "You're just gonna have to tell me what it said." I'm like, oh my goodness. So we've always had those, I read really fast and he reads very slow.
I know his pain.
Yes.
I pause that ish too.
I'm trying to be more sensitive to it, because books, I live and breathe books, and
Mm-hmm.
I used to talk on a radio show in high school too. And so I think I just got really good at reading things quickly and being able to translate it, on air.
Mm-hmm.
And bless his heart, he took the same class and he's like, "How the hell do you do that?" So it's just, I think some people have it, some people don't. So audiobooks, I think, are a game changer for so many reasons, but definitely for anybody who feels distracted or maybe finds reading kind of daunting if they feel like they're a slower reader.
I mean, like I've talked about my story before, but I would either not read, or I would maybe read like a book a year.
Yeah.
And the past couple of years, I think I turned 27. I'm like, you know what? This is I need to read. Like, I can't keep watching shit. I need to read.
Yeah.
And every year I've been getting better and better. Last year I read 35 books, and I'm like,
Wow.
I can't believe that actually happened. So
No, that's insane. That's
Audible,
insane.
I'm the biggest supporter of.
All right. So now I need to get after it and get Take Your Turn Teddy on Audible.
Please do. I'm really, really
I will.
excited.
I will. Maybe I'll send it to you and say, "Okay, is this Vincent Price enough?"
Absolutely. I would though. I like your voice, and I think you should at least try. Do a
All
chapter.
right. All right. You're my editor, my publisher. I adore the owner of my publishing house, and he said every person feels this way. And he said I do have a tendency when I talk to I also work with him as a teaching assistant. When I talk to students, my voice gets higher. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's this, I want to be like, "Yeah, writing's hard, but it's okay. Like, keep writing." It's that like nurturing, I want to
Yeah.
nurture them and make them feel comfortable and confident. But when I talk about horror, he said you get serious. He said you get serious and your voice, like, it drops. And I guess I'd never realized it. And then I started doing a couple podcasts and I realized my teaching voice and my talking about horror voice are very different.
Nice.
So, and I have an identical twin, and she said, people always say our voices are so similar, but she said, when you talk about your writing, I can't match that.
Thank you for bringing up your twin again, because now I have to ask. I know we both dislike Kubrick's movie, but did you and your sister ever do the twins costumes together?
Okay, so we never did the twins costume, but my sister and I talked about having a radio show on. My high school was fantastic, very artsy. So my sister and I had a radio show, and our little tagline was "Come listen with us forever and ever and ever," and people went nuts. I mean, the show was at 6 a.m. and people would get on and just want to hear that line. And it was totally by accident. One day, I said, "I'm Haley," and she goes, "And I'm Hannah," and at the same time. But we kind of looked at each other like, oh no, we're talking at the same time. So it came out kind of creepy. We said, "And you're listening to Jeff 92. And so our wonderful teacher, Mr. Brist, ran in and he's like, "That was kind of creepy, but it was wonderful." And he's like, "Get in here, let's record a tagline and make it creepy." So we did. And so I've always had a special place for the Grady, the twins in The Shining. So I've never done the costume though. Maybe after COVID, when it's acceptable to go out and be more social, maybe I will convince my sister to do it with me.
Please do. That'd be so mint. Also, Haley and Hannah.
Yes. My mother gave us very twin names. And see, I say that and I do an eye roll. And then I meet twins and it's like, I'm Rebecca and I'm Angie. And I'm like, missed opportunity. Like, mother, what are you doing?
I don't know if I would do names that are similar. That's interesting, because now that I think I'd have to.
Yeah, no, I definitely think I would have to. Yeah. And my mom, my poor mother used to do this thing where she would go, Hannah, like, so she'd start to say Haley and then move into Hannah. And then, we just ridiculed her and we'd be like, "You don't know who we are."
Last twin question. Did you ever switch places?
Yes. And we took tests for each other. I know, listeners, terrible. We did. So many things where, I had anxiety, she had anxiety, she didn't want to do this, and we did it. Cheerleading was hilarious because people thought we were trying to all the time, because we had our school jackets had our names on them, and we lived in the same house, so we would just grab them. And then, like, I would go into my chemistry class dressed for my game after school, and my teacher would say, "Hannah, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm Haley." And he's like, "Nice try, you didn't remember to switch your jacket." I'm like, "No, I'm not trying to be Haley. I am Haley. I just grabbed my sister's jacket." So we did have a couple of times where teachers thought we were trying to switch places and take tests for each other just because we grabbed the wrong item of clothing.
I inspired you to do tornadoes. You ever thought about doing a twin story?
See, and I get asked that question a lot, and it would have to be done very well, because as a twin, I hate the twin trope. It feels
it's been
always
used to death.
And it's easy, open, there is an evil twin. Like, it's so if you have something like The Shining, where it's just these twins that exist a little bit more naturally, like, I don't mind the twins in The Shining. I don't mind them at all. Like the twins in Harry Potter, I love them. They're great characters, but I hate in the movies that they say every single thing at the same time and dress identically every single day. My sister and I probably once a day, we live together. We will once a day say something at the exact same time. We will go to opposite ends of a clothing store, meet each other back, and have the same stuff in hand. So it's not to say we don't do freaky twin shit, because we do. But I think there's also like this, it's like a report card. Like, you have to be at 100% of the time, and that's just not factual. So yes, maybe I could do something with twins. It would just take me a while to figure out what and how would I do it in a way that wouldn't annoy me as a twin reader.
Is she a writer as well? Like, could you co-write it together?
No, she is not. We actually joke about her writing skills because, she'll write a paper for school and it's like he was born in 1872. 1872 is when he was born. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm trying to hit the word count and I'll edit it and I'll delete things. And she's like, why are you deleting things? No, so she is, bless her heart, not a good writer. My sister does have a badass job though that I've used for so much research in my book. She works in surgery every single day as an assistant. She's a surgical technologist. So there's so many things that I never knew existed, like a bone saw.
Oh,
Yeah, and just all of these things. And even, even in a young adult horror novel, I have this burn scene. And I had so many friends who work in the hospital who told me that was like the most accurate description of burnt flesh. And it's because my sister has seen it. My sister has responded, to
wow.
like emergencies like that, to gunshot wounds. And I listen to these serial killer podcasts and I'm always focused on like the victims who survive and who get away and like the means in which they do it. Like the
Hmm.
vampire of Dusseldorf. This woman was stabbed in the head and the blade was stuck in her head and she made a tourniquet out of her coat and put it around her head. I'm like, how does this woman survive this? And my sister can say, well, what had to have happened was. And so it's really cool because it takes these things that are, incredible and allows me to use them without being unrealistic. The
Hmm.
backup is there. And so I am very thankful to have her in that way.
Have have you ever just shown her Vincent Price and be like, look at all the blood. That's so realistic, and just have her start twitching?
No, no. But that is something that's really cool. So though my sister does not write, she doesn't love horror. Like, so I'm a big fan of the Conjuring universe.
Love The
Um,
Conjuring.
yes, love the Conjuring. My sister, she hates things like that. Like she doesn't want to be scared.
Hmm.
But she loves Tim Burton and loves Vincent Price. So that's kind of cool. So we still get
Nice.
that. She reads all of my books, even though she hates being afraid. Like she'll text me and she'll say, okay, Teddy's going to the basement, but I need to sleep tonight. So should I keep reading or do I stop reading for the night? And I'm like, maybe it's time to put it away.
That is that is a nice support system right there.
It is very much. My boyfriend Jeremy, he is such a horror fan as far as movies. So we have this process where we sit down and I turn on Otter, the Otter app, and I just pour everything out to him. The research I've done, kind of story ideas, and he just has this knack for asking the right questions that I can usually take our conversations and edit it into scenes, start creating scenes
Nice.
from that. Yeah, so he's a big part of my creative process. He also reminds me to take breaks, which I'm not very good at.
I'm that way with my wife. Hey,
Yes.
stop.
Yeah. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You don't understand. He's like, I do. You need to slow down.
Um, this has been a load of fun.
It
I
has
I,
been a lot of fun.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. But before we let
Yes.
you go, where can we find your books?
So all of my books are available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. If you do want signed copies, you can just go to HaleyNewlinAuthor.com and you can buy signed editions as well.
When does that? Because you mentioned it before, there's a hardcover coming out.
Yes, the hardcover edition of Take Your Turn Teddy with original illustrations by Claire Smith, who's an incredible artist, comes out April 16th. So we're coming up on it pretty, yeah.
Very nice. And overall, where can we find you? Where are you on social media?
I'm really active everywhere. Haley Newlin author is my handle everywhere. But I am most active on Instagram. I just think Instagram is the most fun. I get to play around with
Hmm.
pictures. I think that's such a great platform too for horror fans. I love Instagram because it lets me combine horror books and horror film. I get to talk about that so much with users. So Mostly Instagram.
All right. Haley, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on and just talking some Vincent Price, Stephen King, and just horror in general.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was great. I don't get to talk about Vincent Price enough.
Um, yeah, maybe come this fall we can watch some and we can review some because I
Yes.
would love to hear some of your takes on some of his
Yes.
movies.
That would be amazing. We have to do that.
It's we're booking it. Thank you for listening to our viewers. Let us know. Have you been inspired from two passionate Vincent Price fans? Are you now determined to go out and watch a Vincent Price? A lot of them are on Amazon Prime. If you have
Yes.
Amazon Prime, please let us know in the comments what you thought. And until next time, watch Vincent Price. See you later, guys.